Hello, everybody. I hope you are all there already. We will just wait some seconds to be sure everybody has the same hour. I'm here with Benedict, who will also help me in this and read all your questions and interrupt me if there is a question she knows I won't speak about. Thank you, Benedict, for this. I don't know how many of you are already there. I will check that.
So you're welcome.
Okay, many people are already there. We have people from around the world, I guess, today, because we make it in English. So we will start already. Happy to be here and share with you my insight about accessibility. I work in this field for many and many years now, and I'm always happy to share my knowledge and give you tips and evangelize accessibility. So today it's the first webinar of a series. As you know, if you read the messages on LinkedIn, it's a series of 5 webinars. Today it's just introduction to convince you to follow the other ones and convince you to apply the accessibility rules to your website or app. So the other webinars that will come up starting from next week are the first one, Step in the Shoes of Disabled Users. And this is really a nice webinar. If it had existed before, I would have followed it before. It's really interesting because we will have together Vincent Leone, who will show you how he surfs the web with his screen reader. And I will also show you many simulations of how one surfs the web when he suffers from dyslexia, for instance. So you will really be in the shoes of disabled users for whom you will design. So don't miss it. And it's really rare, and it's not something that you can read in 5 minutes in an article on the web. The second webinar, it's about 10 tools that I will share and I will show you directly showing on websites. And about that for the first, so Step in the Shoes of Disabled Users, and the second, we will directly test websites. So the first 3 registrants to those webinars will have their own website tested online directly. So that's also something interesting and common. I really wanted to make this series of webinars particular and not just something that you can read in 5 minutes in articles. Is how to set up an action plan, also something that is not easy to find on the web, an action plan to implement accessibility, how to start, how to split the actions, and how to check also what has been done and what has to be done. And then the last webinar is done by Benedict. It will be about accessibility of PDFs. So also how to start, what to do to have your PDF accessible, because as you know, the PDFs from after 2018 have to be accessible. I hope everybody knows what is accessibility, but if not, I will start by explaining you that. So I have this background in accessibility since already 2004. I made an exam in France, the AccessiWeb certification, and I really recommend this. If you speak French, go there. It's the best training in accessibility in French. And even if I do train people, this training is really, really advanced in 7 days with an exam work to be presented. So really, I recommend this training. So for the one who don't know yet what is accessibility, here's what it is supposed to be. So this is the definition of the World Health Organization, and I don't agree with it. So that's why I said, what is accessibility supposed to be? So according to the World Health Organization, accessibility is only for people with disabilities. So, and this is the common understanding of accessibility. On the right, you see several synonyms that you can use to look on internet what is accessibility. And mostly A11Y, because accessibility is really difficult to write. So this is the tag also for Twitter, just A11 letters and Y. And you will find a lot of websites that also say that accessibility is for the disabled peoples and your visitors suffering from disability. But it is not the right reason to do accessibility. And we will discover why. So what is a disability? A disability can be of several sources, obviously motor impairment, sensory impairment, organic impairment, and intellectual or mental impairment. You will find a lot of information about this and a lot of statistics and all that on the web, so I won't go in details in it. 8% of men are colorblind. That's huge value, and only less than 1% for women. For many other things, we are better than men. But this statistic is eye-opening because the contrast, for instance, this is one key issue in accessibility. Make sure that the contrasts are good enough. And if you don't understand who will use your website and which impairment they may have and how many they are, you may forget to check the contrast. So there are rules to make contrast big enough so that people can read and understand your content, even if they are colorblind. So 8% of colorblind, 80% of disabilities that are invisible. So if you think there are only a few and you don't see them on the street, well, actually, you probably meet some of them every day. You just don't see it. 80% of disabilities occur during life. So that's a number that's, well, make you understand that maybe it can happen to you. I don't hope it, but you may one day benefit from the accessibility as it is defined by the World Health Organization. And another value important to know and well known in accessibility is 50%, 50 to 20% of the population declares to suffer from permanent disability. I say declares because it's based on surveys, so it's not statistics of the national disability associations. It's really how people feel. And this is also the main argument that basic, like novice users, novice workers in the field of accessibility give. Let's do it for the 15 or 20% of the population that has permanent disability. And as you understood, that's not my argument. So this is one of the most famous blind people that does work and does have many responsibilities. So yes, amongst those 15 to 20% of disabled people, there are many working and even having high responsibilities. So they use a computer, not all of them, obviously, but they can really be involved in the society. And we have to give them the same access to the same contact with the same usability as we have when we surf websites and use applications. So this is to close the argument about doing accessibility for disabled people. So this is the first return on investment. If you follow the wrong definition of accessibility by the World Health Organization, do it for the disabled people. I put here /CSR because often we hear clients saying, okay, we want to do it because it's part of our CSR policy and we are an ethic company and we want everybody to have access to our content. So that's really good. And if you do accessibility for this, I think it's a really, really good reason, but it's often not sufficient to convince people to do accessibility and have websites done for everybody. So we will go further and find other return on investment because it is an investment, accessibility, and I will give you other arguments. So let's go through 7 myths about accessibility to make you understand why I don't rely on this argument of disability only to convince my clients to have their website and application accessible. So the first myth I hear from my clients is My website is already accessible. It has plugins. So these are some examples of plugins. You can have a plugin to enlarge fonts, plugin to improve the contrast. It's often black and yellow, and plugins to hear the full page. So this is Read Speaker, but there are other plugins. So the issue with those plugins is that if you rely on each website to find a zoomer, to find a contrast switcher, to find a text-to-speech system, well, you will always have to look on each website where they did put it, if they did put it. So obviously, people that need to increase the font or need to change the background of the text, they have their own system. Your website has to be compatible with the system of the users, not to provide one. Imagine that you surf the web and each time you will first say, okay, can I read this website? Where is the button to switch the contrast, to enlarge the text? No, people who need it, they have their own system. To enlarge, it's just zooming, that's really easy and everybody of us know it. For contrast, you can have your own style sheet. And there are also plugins, add-ons for this. And you have your style sheet and you can switch yellow with a background blue, yellow with a background black, or whatever contrast you need. So your website has to be compatible with the user system and not provide specific ones. For the text-to-speech, this is really interesting because non-disabled people are using more and more such system because they are lazy and just want to hear the content instead of reading it. Sometimes it's also complex to read on mobile, or you are driving and you want to use that time to hear an article about accessibility. I can dream. So we see more and more success of podcasts. So maybe this system of text-to-speech will be used by anybody in the future, even if for now it's quite robotic and not really funny to hear, but it could be improved. So don't do this for the disabled people, for the blind or dyslexia who also do hear content instead of reading it if they really suffer from deep dyslexia. So not only blind users will hear your content. So you can provide it, but it's not an accessibility solution. It's a solution for anybody, maybe in the future when it will be less robotic. For instance, blind users read really, really quickly. So those systems sometimes don't even have a way to raise the velocity. And also you cannot skip paragraphs with this system. You have to hear the full article. So it's really not useful for accessibility. And pay attention that the sellers like Read Speaker say that if you have it, your website is accessible. It's not at all. Second myth, my developers know what they do and my website is probably already accessible. No, unfortunately not. The schools don't teach accessibility to developers, and developers already have many and many challenges, make it compatible, make it responsible, and not always the time and resources to also make it accessible. So by default, they don't make the website accessible because it's hard job and it's not included in the project probably. It's only for developers. Well, no. Writers, copywriters also do accessibility efforts, designers, interaction designers, visual designers, they are all involved in accessibility. So don't think the job was done until the developers took the code. They have their main part in the accessibility, but it's not only for them. Let's do it at the end, once for all. So we will do the whole project, publish the websites, and maybe for another release, or if we are lucky before the final launch, the clients say, okay, we will make an effort for accessibility. Unfortunately not. It's a hard job. It starts from the wireframe already. You can have some decisions that will impact on accessibility already when you are just designing the wireframe of your website or app. So all this is to show you that accessibility is not an easy task. And if you only do it for the disabled users, you won't have the energy to do it till the end, until you are really involved, maybe personally involved in disabilities. Myth number 5, we will automate everything. It will be easy. We will test and remediate automatically. Not at all. Now we are around 30% of the accessibility issues that can be solved and tested automatically. Only 30%. So the 70 other percent have to be made semi-manually or fully manually. So it's also time consuming and requires a lot of effort. Websites are ugly when they are accessible, not at all neither. Yes, it has constraints, but you can live with these constraints and still have a beautiful website. This is the website of Paradisa Zoo in Belgium. Maybe it's not the most beautiful, but it's not ugly at all. And there are images and there are effects and even moreover animations. So it's not a reason not to do accessibility. And accessible sites can only benefit small percentage of people. This is the last one, because we are back to the argument that I told you before. If you do accessibility for the disabled people, maybe you will be blocked at this argument because it's only 50 to 20% of the users who will benefit, according to the World Health Organization. So we are back to this first return on investment. That is not the right argument for accessibility. At the beginning, when I started accessibility 15 years ago, it was also my argument, because it was what is said on the internet and what most articles says. But then my clients answered, well, only 15%. Then I will focus on my 85 other persons. Or it's not my target audience anyway. Or other like all disabilities are not necessarily an obstacle, and that is right. If you have one leg instead of two, probably you won't have any issue surfing the web. So yes, it's complex to maintain this argument, and let's check other arguments then. So there is much more than accessibility for the disabled people. Return on investment number 2. Let's do it for exceptional situations. So we talked about disabilities, mental disability, physical disability, but this is actually the definition of Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web. And he did include many other situations inside accessibility. So it's all individuals, regardless of their hardware and software, their native language, their network, their culture, and also their physical and mental abilities. This is a much better definition of accessibility, and it has much more good arguments. That's the Microsoft Design Toolkit, inclusive Microsoft Design Toolkit you can surf on the web, and it's really clear, and it explains you what are the permanent disabilities that impact on using an application or surfing on the web, but also the temporary one and the situational one. Temporary one is, for instance, arm injury. If you have an arm injury, it's like if you had only one arm, and if you are not lucky, it was the right one. So it's even more complex to move the mouse, for instance. So if it's complex to move the mouse, it's also complex to target small clickable areas. Situational impairment. So you have a baby, you have your baby in your arm, and then also the same situation, maybe you will have difficulties to move the mouse, and you will be in a situation where clicking small clickable areas is complex. Also doing drag and drops. So those two criteria, small clickable areas and drag and drops, they are listed in the accessibility rules. So nothing should rely only on the mouse on a website. You should be able to use the website and interact fully without the mouse. I will show you, well, you will learn in the second webinar how we do to surf the page without touchpad, obviously, no touchpad and no mouse, but it's feasible. And if you design a web page thinking like this, following this rule, you will actually be more usable for everybody in situational temporary disability situation. Here is a statistic from Eurostat. It's a European statistic center. And you see that senior people do use the web. So now they use it a lot. They use it for banking, for instance, banking actions. So it's dealing with money. They are not just surfing passively. They even manage their account on the web. So we spoke about different situational and temporary disabilities, and seniority is also a kind of aside situation concerned by accessibility. The rules written by the W3C to say everything you have to do to have your website accessible, those rules do include considerations for seniors, how they serve and which situation is complex for them. Okay, sorry for the misclick. So the third return on investment, after making it for other situations that are not permanent disabilities, is making it for the sake of UX. So I know there are some UX researchers and designers here watching the webinar, and so they probably know the honeycomb model of Peter Morville. I will be quick on this, but it's just to tell you that it's inside user experience design since the beginning. It's not something new, and you cannot say you are making usable user experience, a good user experience, sorry, if you don't have a website accessible. So accessibility is part of the design of user experience. Let me check, because I hear a lot of beep beep. Just checking that everything is going right. Yes, okay. So accessibility is part of the user experience design, and it's mentioned since the beginning from the big guru of user experience design like Peter Morville. So if your website is part of the value of your website. But okay, that's more theoretical, and it's just for the UXers that are watching here. Let's go to the other return on investment, number 4. Making a website accessible is also making it more findable. So you see that findable was one of the checkpoints of Peter Morville, and we will discover now why an accessible website is more findable. We saw before the boss of ING, the bank, that is blind, and another famous blind user, maybe most famous, but not because he's blind, is Google. So why is Google blind? Google is a machine, so he does not have eyes. He just reads the code that is behind your website, exactly the same way a blind user will read your website. He has a tool that will read the code that is behind the website, interpret it, and transform it in speech. And Google make part of this same flow, reading the code that is behind your website, understanding it as far as he can. And when you see the quality of translation, you know that Google is not fully, let's say, able to understand what is written. So the more you have your website accessible, the easier it will be for Google to understand it. And we will see how. So this, here we go further in the code. So if you don't know everything of code, just forget what you see on the left side and keep the general idea. So inside the code of websites, there are, how could you call them, boxes. So there are boxes that will split the page in areas. They are called landmarks. Some of them are called landmarks. So here you have 3 landmarks, header, main, and footer. Those 3 boxes will separate your page in 3 main areas. What is important for Google is the main area. So in that main area, you have the most important content of your web page. And that's important for Google to know that the content, the dynamic content, and everything that is related to one single page is in the center of the page. At the footer, you have something that is recurrent. Every page has the same list of links. And at the top, also, you have the navigation, logo, search engine, and blah, blah. At the right, you may have ads, for instance, that also are recurrent. So the key value of the website is in the main area. If you don't use these main landmarks, it's more complex for Google to understand where this main content area starts and ends. Where is the core value of your page? Those codes are used in accessibility also because blind people, well, not only them, but them also, they will use it to directly land on this part of the page. Imagine you are blind, you are surfing the web, and every page you open of a website starts with the same thing, the logo, the search engine, about 50 links of navigation, and you have to go through all of them every time you open another page. Because as sighted users, we just skip it, we skip the header, and we directly start reading the main content because we are able to quickly find it with our eyes. For blind people, it's not the same. So their tool starts reading the page from the top to the bottom. And they read again and again and again the header part and all the buttons of the navigation. So it's quite slow. They need a way to directly start reading the page at the main content. One of the ways for them to target this area is relying on a specific code that is named main. So if there is this main landmark in the page, the blind user will benefit and Google will benefit because Google will be able to directly also target this main value content. Other examples for the cross benefits from accessibility and search engine optimization, still for the landmarks. And on the right side, you see the Google Search Quality Evaluator guidelines. This is public, you can find it on the web. And you see that accessibility is one of the 5 groups of checkpoints from Google itself. So Google does evaluate accessibility. Remember, I told you that there are about 30% of issues that can be automatically tested and remediated. So he also does test the website, scroll the page, and check if the basics of accessibility are there. So if Google evaluates this, it's obviously good to have your website accessible. You will gain points to Google. Here you see the Lighthouse tool that is free and also recommended and used by Google to test your page. So what you could do is testing your page also and check how many errors you have, and all those errors will impact on the ranking by Google. Obviously, it's only part of the ranking, it's not the full solutions. Having a good ranking in Google is complex and it depends on many and many actions, let's say. Another benefits are links. So if you work in the field of search engine optimization, you know that links titles are very important for Google. This is a way for Google to know what your website speaks about. In the few words that are contained in the title of a link, those few words are probably the most meaningful words to describe your website. So Google will really give points to each word that targets your website because these will probably describe it best. So if you use links like click here or learn more or website, it has no meaning at all for Google. So you will lose some points on keywords because you put links on titles that have no meaning out of context. This issue of having meaning out of context is a checkpoint from accessibility also. Why? Because blind users, as you see on the right, they use another way to quickly surf and understand the structure and the content of a page. They list the links. So they have a special tool that we don't have to extract all the links of a page. And then they can browse the links and directly click and open the page without having to read it all. So Google will benefit from a clear title and the blind also. Same example, I won't go in details about it, but same example for all the titles that are important for Google and important for the blinds, because they also have the option to create a kind of table of content of your page and directly target titles and subtitles without having to read the whole page. Lists are also good for them. It's easier to understand. If it's well written, they will hear list of 3 items. Okay, so they can understand how is the page and which content to expect. and it's also good for Google and for voice search optimization, if some of you do work in the voice user design, user experience. Sorry. Tables also, there is a special way recommended for the accessibility of tables, and it does help Google to understand the structure of your table. Tabs, the same tabs is the kind of title of the page, and it's important for Google, and it's recommended by accessibility also. So if you do go through all the checkpoints of accessibility and make your website accessible, actually you will benefit from a better optimization for Google too. Well, I say Google, all search engine optimization. And obviously, accessible writing, it's important for Google to write clearly, simply, short sentences, and all that is also listed and recommended in the accessibility checkpoints. Number 5, making a website accessible is making it compliant. Compliant to what? Compliant to the law, because there is a law in Europe for all websites and applications from the public sector. I will just give you the trend here. The trends comes from the United States. They started before, long time ago, and it inspired Europe. And Europe took quite a long time to decide and write a directive that is already now applicable in all European countries. So in Belgium and any European countries, the public sector websites have to be accessible since last year. But not all of them. There are exceptions. There are deadlines depending on the format. I won't go deep in details about it because you can read it also on the web. And for me, it's not neither the right argument for you to be convinced. If you do it for the fear of the legislation and the fear of the law, maybe it's not the most engaging reason. You will lose your force, your energy. Outside of the public sector, so these are the deadlines for the public sectors. So you see that we are here next to 2020, where all the old websites of the public institutions have to be accessible by law in any European country. So I'm happy that you are here learning, and you will have many things to do in this July and August to be ready for September. For the non-public sector, there is no law, not yet, but it's under construction by the European Parliament. So it has been adopted. The directive, well, it's not yet a directive, but the rules have been adopted last year, and we hope it will be in application in 2025. The first compliance deadline for Belgium and the other countries. And here the list of sectors that are involved. So transport, telecom, e-commerce, banking, all the bank applications, for instance, e-books. So you see e-commerce and banking, there is room for improvement in this sector and a lot of work. So this was for the return on investment number 5. Accessible is also a question of code quality. So if you have a website that is accessible, it will also have a better code quality. Why is it interesting? If you have a good code, it will be more compatible with any device and easier to understand and maintain for your IT team. So let's do it for the accessibility, and you will have a collateral benefit in maintaining your website and have it more compatible. Having a website accessible is also having it ready for the future and for the past.
Regine,
for the past,
Regine,
oui?
can I interrupt you? So you have a question from Olivier Ventrel. Does the non-public sector still needs to make accessible some user flow, such as, for example, being able to consult a bill or renew a subscription, etc.?
Sorry, I didn't get the beginning of the question about that.
So the non-public sector still needs to make accessible some user flow, such as, for example, being able to consult a bill or renew a subscription, etc.
Well, for the moment, the non-public sectors are not concerned by a law, by a directive. So it's under construction, but not applicable right now. But if you do it, yeah, the earlier you do it, the better it is. And you have to start early to be ready by this deadline of 2025. But for the rest, it's the public sector, and all administrative tasks have to be accessible, even with old documents, for instance. That's the reason for accessibility of PDFs. So the new PDFs after 2018 have to be accessible. The older one, if they are useful for administrative tasks, they have to be accessible also. Okay, let's continue. So ready for the past. Why I said past? Because I speak about mobile. So in the past, we said that mobile was the future. So now it's already there. Your website has to be compatible to the mobile display. Usually I see about 70% of users coming from mobile on websites. And what is the link between accessibility and mobile? Well, some of the checkpoints of accessibility do directly impact on the mobile experience. For instance, what is called the reflow criteria. So your content has to reflow gracefully, as they said, without considering the width of the screen of the user. So, for instance, totally tetraplegic users have specific computers on their wheelchair with small screens, and your website needs to be easy to read even on small screens. So they have small screens, and mobile users also have small screens. So if you do it for one, you will do it for the other. And you see here also sources from Google, where you can see that Google also considers accessibility linked to mobile friendliness. On the upper part, you see the mobile usability errors from Lighthouse, and the link to learn more directly targets the accessibility styles of the dev guidelines of Google. So Google itself mixes accessibility and mobile friendliness. Ready for the past is also being ready for the touch screens. And the touch area is one of the criteria of the accessibility. It has to be big enough. Being accessible is also being ready for the future. Here, the one that already followed my courses know what is the common point between these two objects. They both have been made first for disabled users. So now we all use the remote controls to avoid moving to the televisions, but for some it's impossible to move and touch the television. So it has been developed for them before, and now we all use it. And there are many other examples where accessibility has been done for some, but is also useful for everybody now. Here, the voice interaction. So long time ago, the Dragon naturally speaking text-to-speech system helped tetraplegic people surfing the web. So they could just speak to the computer, and this replaced typing or using the mouse. Now we can do it also if you have a smart TV. You can speak to your TV and move and surf the web. You can speak to your Tesla. I had no opportunity to test it yet, but I hope someday I will have a Tesla. And you can also test this experience of voice interaction with Dragon Pro. So you can have your computer type your documents, for instance. You just speak what you want and he types directly. So this was used a long time ago by disabled people. It's a way to interact with a website. And if your website is accessible, it will be possible to interact with it, filling the forms, for instance, just by using your voice. So the code quality is also good for the machine-to-machine interaction. So all what is IoT and the future way we will do our shopping directly by the fridge that will shop for us directly in the app. So if it's accessible, it's easier for any tool, any machine to interact with your code. And obviously, when we speak about voice, we have also all these assistants. Someday we won't even have a screen, so we will all be blind. If you want to test it, you can use Read Aloud to have your website spoken with a text-to-speech voice reader. Yeah, back to the Tesla, the interaction by the voice, and here the smart TV. The fridge, some other example of the fridge. Interaction with the eye, so it also exists from years and years. So for tetraplegic people who could even speak, they could use their eye to target clickable areas on websites if they are big enough. If you know iTribe, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was a system to interact with your tablet, for instance, just with the eye. And iWink was for the mobile. So it will probably be developed furthermore. I think iPhones already have it integrated. You can interact with your iPhone just with the eye. So it has, if your website is accessible from the beginning, it's useful for everybody now. Interact with the brain, I will let you dream about this. Someday we will be able to drive our car with the brain, to interact with our mobile with the brain. It already exists. There are prototypes, and I think nobody bought them yet. But someday maybe we will interact with the brain. And some people do interact with their brain since a long time ago. And it's also something that is possible if your website is accessible. So having your website accessible is having your website ready for the future. That's why I call it the NASA of the web. And then I spoke about disabilities a lot, even if I discarded this argument as a convincing one for accessibility. But let's go back to disabilities. So disabilities are the origin of accessibility. If your website is compatible with the tools that disabled people use, then it's partially accessible. Part of it is linked to the tools that they use. And so there are rules written by the W3C that will just list everything you have to do to have your website compatible with those tools and easy to use for disabled people. Those rules exist at the national, international level, and also national level. Here in Belgium, it's called Any Surfer. So you can find them online, and we won't study them deeply in these webinars, because I think there is much more value in telling you something that you can't read in articles. These are the WCAG, and I will also show you how to use them, because there are many sources, many URLs of the WCAG. It's quite complex, and even after 15 years, I still discover things. It's a huge website, but we will see in another webinar how to find your way in it. So this was for the first one was for the old people. I told you about senior. This one is for the mobile accessibility. So it's all split in many, many pages to read. So that's why I encourage you to follow the next webinars. In the second one, we will go through some tools. One of it is a tool that helps you following these rules, understanding where to start and how to find solution to your code issues, because most of the issues come in the code, but not all. They are the most tricky to correct, and I will show you where to start in the WCAGs. And then this demo from Vincent Leone, who will show you what it's like to hear a website with his screen reader and share his experience as a blind user. Then we will go through these 10 tools I told you. They are all free tools, so you can use them the day after the webinar or in the afternoon, because it's at midtime. And we will go use them, and I will show you the result of those testing tools directly on 3 websites of the first 3 registrants. Then we will speak about the action plan, how to organize your corrections, and the accessibility of PDF. That's it for today.
Yes. You have a question from Samuel. His question is, how did you measure the role of accessibility in a quantitative way for feeding any business case that will inspire manager. So you have a concrete case with KPIs or other criteria of success for illustrating this approach?
Well, this is a very good question.
I think so.
Yeah. How much will it cost? Yeah. What is the budget of it? Well, it really depends on the current system that you have. Depending on if it's based on a CMS that doesn't allow you to make accessible code, then the impact will be higher. So it's really difficult to quantify the cost of accessibility before you dig in the code and in the whole governance. Actually, how is how is made the design? How are the PDF made? If they are made in Word or in InDesign, it will not be the same effort to make them accessible. So it really depends on each case. And that's also why you don't find on the internet statistics and costs. There is just one article that says it costs 10% of the full budget of the website. But it's really not something that you can generalize to your case. It depends on the situation of your website and what your app. In banking, for instance, it's probably more than 10% because there is a high legacy. It's really complex to modify something without destroying something else. So I would say first dig in your situation, and you won't find one size fits all percentage to make a cost evaluation. For the KPIs, well, I would mostly target the KPIs in search engine optimization because this can be calculated. How many more visitors, how long they stay. And these results of the Lighthouse test, so this can also be a KPI to have it with 0 errors, which means that Google will appreciate more your website. Other criteria of success. No, I would say look in your stats and check how long people stay on your website. What you can't follow is which tools they use. So you cannot say, okay, we have more blind users visiting our websites because we have more screen readers connected. You cannot track that because they use a normal browser, and in addition they have a special tool to have your website read out loud, website or app on your mobile phone. You also have in all mobile phone it's integrated. You have speech systems. Anything else? Let me see 2 questions, Benedict.
There is a question right now. What are the penalties in case of non-respect? I have seen nothing, so not a fan of penalty at all, but something you have no choice.
Yes, Olivier, I'm also sorry there is no penalty yet. What the European legislation says that penalty can be applied by a judge. So it means you have to go to the court to ask for a penalty against the websites. Probably no single user will do it, but mostly associations may start legal action against the website. What is more impacting is the visibility of your inaccessibility, because there are reports published by by each state. I don't know if Belgium decided who will publish those reports, but there is a special organism that is mandated to check the websites, the public websites, and publish a report of accessibility. So it will be public online. So it's not good for your brand, let's say. That's now for the moment. If the argument of the law is the one that convinced you, well, probably you would lack a penalty. Because if you just do it because you are forced to do it, probably you will wait for a penalty to do it. So don't push that argument and push the other ones. In the United States, there are penalties. And as we saw, the United States is the inspiration of Europe. So let's hope they will apply a penalty without having to go to the court and start a legal action against the website. What I know is that Europe recommends that that the penalty is related to the brand and the size of the website. So for big websites, the risk is bigger. But that's all what I can say. There is no percentage of benefits or whatever that is set as penalty. Not in Europe. Come on, Olivier, don't you have another question? I know that you always have many questions. Samuel.
Yeah. The bouncing on Olivier question, can we link a law to support better the initiative?
The bien-être law. I don't know this law. Which law is it? Maybe you can add.
So can you precise your question, please, Samuel? And you have Asha. Do you have a point of view about how accessible are Webflow, Squarespace, Wix websites?
Well, it's if you have specific examples, then we can have a look at them. For CMS websites, it really depends on the CMS, but also the way it has been used. So even if a CMS is accessible and has been wrongly used, your website won't be accessible. So it's difficult to generalize. But if the CMS is not accessible, obviously the website won't be, but the contrary is not right. The CMS can be accessible even if the website is not. And then for specific websites, I don't know all of them, but we can have a look during the next webinars if they are. There are tools to check the websites automatically. Like I said, you can check 30% of the websites automatically. So if you want to test, for instance, you can use, which one can I recommend here? Wave, W-A-V-A, Wave. So you look for it on the internet and you test the website with the Wave. You will have a general percentage of accessibility and then the details. La bien-être law, Samuel, what do you mean by it?
Nothing more. So I think that you have all my email address, and so please feel free if you have some specific questions about accessibility to ask us. And for the moment, there is no more question. It seems your explanation were very clear, Regine. Or maybe people are very hungry.
Okay, well, if there is no other question, I saw one maybe, or it's... Ah, okay, RGPD, etc. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. For employees, well, they must make the working environment accessible for their employees if they have disabled employees. But then here we speak more about all what is internal softwares, even PowerPoint documents, the intranet and all that. And it's more linked to your own employees. But you are right that we often see clients forgetting them. So they will make their website for their customers accessible, but they will forget the inner experience, the experience as an employee. And intranets have to be accessible also for all the public sectors. So it hasn't been forgotten by the European law, but it's often forgotten by the client that they actually also have to do all, to make all their inner websites like intranet, extranet accessible. Now, making a website, a PowerPoint accessible, it's quite complex. So it's a dream to think that all the PowerPoints of a company will be accessible because there are some disabled employees, unfortunately. Okay, well, I think we will close up now. I really hope to see most of you in the next webinars. I lost you for some seconds, I think. Yeah, so I hope to see you in the next webinars. I will put you back the URL to register to the next webinar. So this is the short URL, easier to remember, but you can find the links in my LinkedIn activity feed. You can register to any single webinar. It's not mandatory to register to all 4 that are coming. So really don't hesitate to register, and see you back there.
Okay. Okay, there was a last question from Asha. Do you have a good practice for cognitive disability? I don't know if you have time to answer to this question.
Well, I can recommend the specific guidelines of the WCAG. There is a specific section about cognitive disability, but you're right that it's the less treated disability. Unfortunately, there is much less literature about cognitive disability than others, and yeah, there is room for improvement in this field. It's much more difficult to find information about cognitive disabilities and their impact. Okay, so see you next, and have a nice afternoon, everybody. And thank you for coming today.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.